She vanished inside her own flat. The twisted case of Joanna Yeates, a woman walked into her apartment after a night out with coworkers and vanished almost instantly. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, no witnesses who saw the attack. Just an unlocked front door, a phone still sitting inside her coat pocket, and a frozen pizza receipt that would become one of the most important clues in the entire case. At first, police thought she had disappeared without a trace. Then, on Christmas morning, a couple walking their dog made a horrifying discovery buried in the snow outside the city. And suddenly, one of Britain's biggest murder investigations exploded into national panic. Joanna Yeates was only 25 years old. She was talented, successful, and building what looked like the perfect future with her boyfriend in Bristol. But what makes this case terrifying isn't just the murder itself. It's how close police came to accusing the wrong man, while the real killer quietly watched the entire investigation unfold from the apartment next door. By December 2010, Joanna Yeates seemed to be entering one of the happiest periods of her life. She had a successful career in landscape architecture, a serious relationship, a beautiful apartment in Bristol, and plans for the future that felt increasingly real. From the outside, everything looked stable, normal, safe, which is exactly why what happened next terrified the entire country. On Friday, December 17th, just days before Christmas, Joanna finished work and went out for drinks with coworkers in Bristol city center. Her boyfriend, Greg Reardon, had already traveled out of town to visit family and planned to return for Christmas later that week. That meant Joanna would spend the weekend alone in their apartment. And according to friends, she didn't like that idea at all. Joanna had reportedly mentioned feeling uneasy about the apartment before. It was a large, older house divided into separate flats, and she was still adjusting to living there. Coworkers later said she seemed uncomfortable staying alone for the weekend, which was partly why everyone stayed out together after work at around 8 p.m. Joanna finally left the bar and started walking home alone. At first, nothing seemed unusual. She stopped at a Tesco supermarket around 8:40 p.m. and bought a frozen pizza. Surveillance footage later showed her calmly shopping and then stopping at another store to buy 2 bottles of cider before heading home. That small, ordinary shopping trip would become one of the final confirmed moments of her life. Meanwhile, Greg texted her after arriving safely at his relative's home. No response at the time. He didn't think much of it. She was out drinking with coworkers. Maybe she went to bed early. Maybe her phone died. But when Saturday passed without a reply, then Sunday, the silence started feeling deeply wrong. Greg finally returned to the apartment Sunday evening. And immediately, something felt off. The front door was unlocked. That detail terrified him instantly because Joanna was careful, especially while home alone on the ground floor facing the street. Greg walked inside calling her name. Then he made one more call to her phone, and suddenly, he heard the ringtone coming from inside the apartment. Joanna's phone was still there, inside her coat pocket, along with her keys and personal belongings. At that moment, Greg knew something was seriously wrong. Because Joanna would never voluntarily leave home without her coat, keys, or phone in the middle of December, police arrived shortly afterward along with Joanna's parents. And almost immediately, investigators reached a disturbing conclusion. Joanna likely never left the apartment alive, but the scene itself made no sense. There were no signs of forced entry, no blood, no overturned furniture, no obvious struggle. It was as if someone had simply erased her from existence. Then Joanna's mother noticed something investigators had overlooked at first: the frozen pizza receipt. The timestamp showed Joanna made it home safely after leaving the bar. But strangely, neither the pizza nor the packaging could be found anywhere inside the apartment. That tiny missing detail became incredibly important later, because investigators started theorizing Joanna may have been attacked almost immediately after arriving home, before she even had time to eat. Then came another chilling development. Police canvassed houses across the street asking neighbors if they noticed anything unusual that Friday night. And several people reported hearing screams around 8:50 p.m. At the time, nobody called police because it was Christmas season in Bristol. People assumed it was drunken partying or random street noise. But now detectives feared those screams may have been Joanna dying only minutes after entering her home. The city panicked. Young women became terrified to walk alone. Rumors exploded about a possible serial killer roaming Bristol. And honestly, investigators themselves weren't ruling that possibility out because there was no clear motive, no evidence of sexual assault, no robbery. Nothing obvious connecting Joanna to a personal enemy, which created an incredibly unsettling question. What if someone killed her simply because they wanted to? The investigation rapidly became one of the largest in Bristol's history. More than 70 officers joined the case. Detectives reviewed hundreds of hours of surveillance footage from Joanna's walk home. Nothing suspicious appeared. They searched trash bins, interviewed coworkers, investigated strangers seen nearby, and searched neighboring apartments. Still nothing. Then on Christmas morning, the entire case changed. A couple walking their dog outside the city noticed something strange sticking out from a snowy embankment near a remote road. At first, it looked like clothing. Then they realized it might be human remains. Police rushed to the scene. Buried in the snow was Joanna's body, and the discovery only made the case more disturbing. Because the freezing temperatures had preserved her body so well that investigators initially struggled to identify visible injuries. But during autopsy, examiners discovered faint marks around her neck consistent with manual strangulation. Someone had killed Joanna slowly with their hands. Even stranger, there were no signs of sexual assault, and Joanna's clothing was still mostly intact except for one missing sock. Meanwhile, the pizza she bought still wasn't accounted for. There was no trace of it in her stomach, no box, no leftovers, nothing. Detectives began theorizing the killer may have removed it from the apartment entirely. That tiny, bizarre detail haunted the investigation because it suggested something psychologically strange about the offender. And now Bristol's fear escalated into full-blown obsession. The media covered the case non-stop. Reward money climbed higher and higher. Every suspicious man in the city suddenly became a potential suspect. Then investigators focused on someone who seemed almost too perfect for the role, Christopher Jeffries, Joanna's landlord, an eccentric retired professor who lived upstairs. And once the media got hold of his name, the entire country turned against him almost overnight. At first glance, Christopher Jeffries looked exactly like the kind of man the public expected a killer to be. He lived alone, rarely socialized, spoke in an unusual theatrical way, and according to neighbors, he often came across as eccentric and awkward. But what truly pulled investigators toward him was something much more important. He had a key to Joanna's apartment. That detail mattered enormously because police found no signs of forced entry anywhere inside the flat. Detectives began theorizing Joanna may have unknowingly allowed someone inside, or the killer entered using a key. Christopher also knew Joanna would be alone that weekend. Just days before the murder, Greg had casually mentioned he was leaving town to visit family. Suddenly, investigators saw a possible narrative forming: an older, isolated man, a young woman alone, access to the apartment, no forced entry. And soon the media transformed Christopher into Britain's most hated man. Newspapers practically treated him as guilty before charges even existed. Reporters camped outside his home. Cameras followed him constantly. Television hosts analyzed his appearance, his speech, even his hairstyle, as if looking strange somehow proved murder. Meanwhile, detectives interrogated him aggressively for hours. But there was one major problem. No evidence connected him to Joanna's death. No DNA, no blood, no forensic link whatsoever. Still, public pressure kept intensifying. Then police received what seemed like another devastating clue. A neighbor claimed he remembered seeing Christopher's car leaving the building around the time Joanna disappeared and later returning. To investigators, this suddenly fit their theory perfectly. Maybe Christopher killed Joanna, carried her body to the car, drove outside the city, buried her in the snow, and quietly returned home. The public completely accepted that story. But detectives slowly started noticing something strange about the witness himself. The neighbor had originally told police he noticed nothing unusual that night. Only after Christopher's arrest did he suddenly remember seeing the car, and that inconsistency became incredibly important. because the witness was another neighbor living directly beside Joanna's apartment. Vincent Tabak. At first, Vincent seemed almost invisible in the investigation, educated, professional, normal. He worked as an architectural engineer specializing in crowd movement analysis for places like airports and stadiums. Friends described him as intelligent and successful. He lived with his girlfriend and appeared completely ordinary compared to the eccentric retired professor upstairs. And that contrast mattered psychologically. People trusted Vincent because he looked normal. Meanwhile, Christopher looked strange, so people assumed he was dangerous. That mistake nearly ruined an innocent man's life. As detectives revisited Vincent's statements, more red flags appeared. Why did he remember Christopher's car only after the arrest? Why had he waited so long to mention it? And why did his story feel strangely convenient? Then came a crucial phone call. After Joanna's case aired on a major true crime television program, a woman contacted police and suggested Vincent himself might be involved. Investigators never publicly explained exactly why she suspected him. But by that point, detectives already quietly had concerns of their own, so they decided to take a closer look. At the time, Vincent was temporarily in the Netherlands with his girlfriend. Detectives traveled there under the pretense of formally collecting his statement about Christopher's car. But the real goal was something else entirely: DNA. When investigators asked Vincent for a sample, his reaction immediately alarmed them. He became visibly nervous, started asking repeated questions. What evidence had police found? Where exactly was the evidence? What would they compare his DNA against? For a man supposedly uninvolved, investigators found his panic extremely revealing. Eventually, though, Vincent provided the sample, and when detectives returned to Bristol, they finally received the breakthrough that changed everything. Forensic experts had recovered tiny traces of foreign DNA from Joanna's body and clothing. Not enough to determine exactly how it got there, but enough to build a DNA profile. They compared the profile to both Christopher and Vincent. Christopher was eliminated instantly. Vincent matched every trace. That moment completely shattered the investigation, because suddenly the quiet professional neighbor next door became the prime suspect in one of Britain's most infamous murders. Police arrested Vincent immediately, and while the public struggled to believe it, detectives uncovered even more disturbing evidence afterward. His computer showed obsessive monitoring of the investigation from the very beginning. Vincent wasn't casually reading headlines like everyone else in Bristol. He was spending entire days consuming every detail published about Joanna's disappearance and death. Then investigators discovered something even more chilling. Before Joanna's body had even been found, Vincent had searched the exact remote road where she was later discovered dumped in the snow 6 days before police located her body. That single detail devastated his defense, because there was no innocent explanation for it. Then detectives searched deeper into his digital history and uncovered violent pornography, including videos involving women dressed strikingly similar to Joanna. And investigators also discovered illegal material involving minors on his computer, guaranteeing separate criminal charges beyond the murder itself. But perhaps the strongest physical evidence came from Vincent's car. Inside, forensic experts found Joanna's blood. At that point, the case against him became overwhelming. Still, Vincent denied murder. Then suddenly, weeks later, he changed strategy entirely. He confessed, but only partially. Vincent claimed Joanna had invited him into her apartment voluntarily after he saw her through the window. According to him, he attempted to kiss her. She screamed, and in panic, he accidentally strangled her while trying to silence her. Police never believed that story for a second. Investigators concluded Vincent attacked Joanna almost immediately after entering the apartment, then deliberately staged supermarket surveillance footage afterward to create an alibi. And perhaps the most disturbing part of all, he then helped direct suspicion toward Christopher Jeffries while secretly watching the media destroy an innocent man. In October 2011, Vincent Tabak was convicted of Joanna Yeates' murder and sentenced to life in prison. Meanwhile, Christopher Jeffries eventually received public apologies and large settlements from major media organizations that had effectively portrayed him as a monster before any evidence existed. But even after the truth came out, the damage to his life could never fully be undone. And honestly, that may be one of the scariest parts of this entire case. The real killer didn't look suspicious. He looked normal, educated, successful, trustworthy, while the innocent man became the villain simply because he seemed socially awkward and different. Joanna Yeates should have been safe inside her own apartment that night. Instead, a man living only feet away saw an opportunity and destroyed her future forever. If this case shocked you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more true crime documentary, where the real story becomes more disturbing the deeper investigators dig. And let me know in the comments, do you think Vincent Tabak intended to kill Joanna from the moment he entered the apartment? Or do you believe his version that things spiraled out of control?